today's revision, we are revising starting from pages 25-26 about the ancient Middle East and Egypt. So before we start, can you just tell me what is the most important feature of any civilization? How can any civilization emerge? What is the most important?
Governance.
Governance, bravo.
Fertile land.
Bravo, very good, Yusuf. Fertile land, excellent, very good. What else?
Great rulers.
Great rulers, okay, or very bad rulers that will conquer and destroy the land. All right. So we have some features that any civilization must obtain and must have in order to flourish and become flourished. So the civilization we are talking about today, or we are revising it again, is the Mesopotamian civilization. So, in the Fertile Crescent or the Mesopotamian. First, we need to know why did we call them the Mesopotamian. As you can see, this is a map for the world nowadays. Okay, the Mesopotamian civilization arose here in this place in modern-day Iraq. Why do we call them Mesopotamian?
Because it means between the rivers.
Bravo, between two things. Meso means between, okay, or in the middle of, like the Mesoamerican civilization we studied last week. So here it's between two things. What are the two things that is between? We have
The
here,
two rivers.
bravo,
To the
the
right and to
Tigris
the left.
and the Euphrates. So the civilization that arose here was between two rivers. So now, Yusuf, we have the fertile land. As any other civilization in the world, okay, we have the ancient Egyptian civilization arose around the river Nile. We have the Chinese civilization also arose around the Wang River Valley. We have the Indus civilization around the Indian Valley River. Okay, and now we have the Mesopotamian civilization arose around the Tigris and the Euphrates. All right, so Yusuf, will you read, please? Yusuf still with us?
Yes.
All right.
Okay. Civilizations arise in the Fertile Crescent. A deserted climate dominates the land between the Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean Sea. Yet, a number of early civilizations arose here. The region of the Middle East is called the Fertile Crescent, named for its rich soils and golden wheat fields. Over time, nomadic herders, ambitious invaders, and traders easily overcame the region's few natural barriers. As a result, the region became a crossroad where people and ideas met and mingled. This region is often referred to as the Cradle of Civilization. Many of the earliest human civilizations developed in this river valley region because of the availability of water and other agricultural resources.
All right. What is the meaning of this, Yusuf?
So basically, because of the fertile soil and the availability of water, um, the the Mesopotamian civilization had the Fertile Crescent. Yes, that place. It
Yeah.
had lots of civilizations in there, and many of them through trade and invasion, they exchanged traditions and thoughts and ideas. So it was often referred to as the Cradle of Civilizations.
Cradle of Civilization. Bravo. Okay. So, do you remember in the first topic when we studied the Paleolithic and Neolithic periods?
Yeah.
What is the difference between a Paleolithic and Neolithic?
Uh, I completely forgot.
What teacher?
Yeah, I forgot. Yeah, me too. Man. Is it one that's like what?
First
Some are
topic,
nomadic and others are not nomadic?
bravo, bravo, very good, Sally. So you
Yeah.
have the Paleolithic periods. People will still nomad. They just were food gatherers and animal hunters. They did not settle down, right? And yet, once they discovered that there is fertile land, a place that we can grow crops in, so they started settling down. And after settling down, they started the Neolithic period. That was in the first topic, if you can remember. Okay, so here we have nomadic herders, people who started to hunt animals. we have some invaders, we have some traders, people coming and going into the Mesopotamian and Fertile Crescent between the lands. Here, you have here in this place, it's between Europe, Africa, and also Asia. So all people were coming from here, from there, from everywhere to this place. And because this place now held the features for civilization, which is the fertile land along the two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, so they started to settle down in this place. And after settling down in that place, they started to have their own civilization, which of course was very featured. Here, the Mesopotamian civilization arose in the middle of the Tigris and the Euphrates, and because all of this land was fertile and habitable for agriculture, so all the people wanted to settle down here. And of course, because of this specific reason, later on, other invaders will come to have the land. Okay? And page 36. Walid, can you read, please?
Page 36 or 26?
26, I'm sorry.
What paragraph?
The first one, a civilization arises in the Fertile Crescent.
All right. Civilizations arise in the Fertile Crescent. Geography of the Fertile Crescent. Sumerian civilization rose more than 5,000 years ago along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is today Iraq. The Tigris-Euphrates Valley lies in the eastern end of the Fertile Crescent, an area that stretches in an arc from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. Early on, the fertile soil of the Tigris-Euphrates Valley attracted Stone Age farmers who began to raise crops on the land. In time, their descendants produced the surplus food needed to support growing populations. Much later, the ancient Greeks called the Tigris-Euphrates Valley Mesopotamia, which means between the rivers. Around 3300 BC, the world's first civilization developed the southeastern Mesopotamia, or in southeastern Mesopotamia, in a region called Sumer, or Sumer. The Tigris Euphrates, how do you pronounce that? Euphrates. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers flow from the highlands of modern-day Turkey through Iraq into the Persian Gulf. In the spring or early summer, melting snows from the mountains can cause the rivers to overflow. In some years, savage floods cause huge damage. Despite the danger of flooding, farmers planted a variety of crops. Silt left by floodwaters made the soil fertile. Good soil meant that the people of Mesopotamia.
Okay, so simply because now we have the silt, we have the fertile land, the people started to settle down. After settling down, they started to make the small villages, and these villages will grow into cities, and these cities will start to spread around the Mesopotamian civilization and will become into city states. After becoming city states, we will have the one who will just collect all of them under one empire, which is the Sumerian Empire or Sumerian civilization. All right. So far, so good. Any questions so far?
No.
All right. So to the next point, of course, we are just making a revision. We have already studied that. So if you have any question, just stop me. Okay. So another point we are speaking about is how this civilization arose and developed. Okay, but before this, why do we call this land a world crossroads? Sumerian civilization.
Because a lot of trades happened there, I think.
Bravo. A lot of trades happened there. What else?
And there was roads, I think, for traders.
Okay. So, do you remember when we studied? Let's just take a screenshot from this. as we like. Okay, and that's a pen. Red one. All right. Here we have the Indian civilization. Here arose here. Here we have the Egyptian civilization arose in this place, and later here we have the Chinese civilization, and also later civilizations arose after them here in this place. And in this area we have the Mesopotamian civilization in modern day Iraq. So if I want to come from Europe later on in the Roman Empire to Egypt, so I'll just go through this place. If I want to come from India to Egypt, I'll just go this place. From China, I'll just go to this place. From Egypt, I'll go from here. I'll go there. So here we have this place, the Mesopotamian civilization, was like a crossroads for all of the civilization that tried to connect between each other, to have trade among each other. That's why we call them a world crossroad, like a place that you must go to in order to go to another place, even while coming from Europe or from India to Europe, and vice versa. Of course, I will not take all of this place directly. No, I'll first go here, sell some goods, and then go there. From China to India, I'll come directly here, and later come from here to the crossroads. So that's why we call this place a world crossroads. Okay. Next thing is about how did the Sumerian civilization develop. Joining Nahar Saidan. Okay, so how did the Sumerian civilization started to develop? Mr. Salim, still with us?
Yep.
You unmute, please.
All right. Let me just get up. Which paragraph?
The one in front of you.
Oh, yeah, right there. Sumerian civilization develops within a few hundred years of its beginning. Sumer included at least 12 separate city-states. Rival city-states often battled for control of land and water. For protection, people turned to war leaders. Over time, the practice of rule by war leaders evolved into hereditary rule. This resulted in the formation of monarchies. A monarchy is a government in which one person has complete authority to rule in peacetime and lead soldiers in wartime.
All right, before you explain this, Mr. Salim, can I ask you just one question?
Yeah?
What did you do to our Salim?
What?
What did you do to our Salim who reads very fast?
I mean, look, I figured if I read slowly, it's better.
Okay, so can you explain this and tell us what is the meaning of state and monarchies?
All right. So first, within a few hundred years of its beginning, which is the beginning of Sumer, it included city-states.
Stop
So
here,
right, what?
stop here, please. So what is the meaning first of the city? And what is the difference between a city and a state?
Meaning of city-states.
Yes.
It's like a city surrounded by territory and forms an independent state.
Okay. Anyone else?
So the difference between a city and a state.
Yeah, and what is the meaning of city-state?
So a city is just like one city, just
Yes.
nothing around
And a
it.
state
The city
is
itself.
like multiple cities in like one area.
Okay. All right.
Mhm.
Let's take Saudi Arabia, for example. Here we are living in this city, Riyadh, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And also we have Jeddah, Mecca, Najran, Medina, right? Dammam, Khobar. All of these cities are just part of one state.
Yeah,
All of
one
them,
big state,
yes, one big state, which is
which is the Saudi state.
right.
Idiot.
So simply here, Riyadh, Khobar, Dammam, Mecca, Medina. All of this are just one part of Saudi Arabia, one country, one state. But back then, in that period, when we are speaking about a city-state, it means that this city, Riyadh, has its own government, has its own legal system, its own royal governance, its own king, its own leader. Okay, totally separate of that of Al-Kharj, of Mecca, of Medina, of Al-Khubr. So each city means that although they are in the same civilization, okay, yet each one of them is being governed by its own ruler, its own king, its own legal system. All right. So this city is totally separate from that city in its governance. So this city can sometimes invade the other one, and this one will invade it and start to
No,
attack.
they were rival city states.
Not
So they
rival by
no,
100%. They were in the same civilization. Sometimes they
yeah,
will
but it said they were rival.
Saudi history. We have King Abdul Aziz. He was living in Diraya first, and from Diraya he fled to Kuwait, and from Kuwait he came back restoring Riyadh, and from
No, I
Riyadh
mean in the book.
to other countries, other cities, right? So each city was being governed. Here, if you remember the Saudi history last year, King Abdulaziz came from Kuwait with Sheikh al-Sabah. With his help, he started to restore Riyadh. The first attempt in 1901, and later he came again in 1902. Right after he restored Riyadh, he started to restore other cities, including Jeddah, Medina, Diraya, and city by city until he controlled all of Saudi Arabia. Back then, before the restoration, okay, Saudi Arabia was city-state. Again, back before King Abdulaziz restores all of the kingdom, Saudi Arabia was like a city-state. And the same thing, guys, happened in the Sumerian civilization. They were just like city-states, each city being governed by its own ruler, and they were just sometimes they will try to invade each other. Okay, yet until one king who came and started to collect all of them under one civilization. And they also, in the city-state, we have a monarchy. A monarchy is just a government in which one person can hold control of everything. All the authority is just in one hand. Got it? So the difference between a city-state and a city, like state itself contains many cities, but a city-state means each city is a state in itself. Okay, grade 9? Any questions so far?
No,
Come on, any question?
no, I
Okay.
didn't understand this.
All right, let's check a video from Khan Academy. I have already assigned that to your class on Khan Academy. So let's see Salman Khan, what did he say about the Mesopotamian civilization? Of course, he spoke about the cuneiform, the way that they adapted the language. And as I told you before, they adapted the language because of trade between other countries. They needed to adapt a semi or a simple language. First, they adapted the cuneiform, and later they changed it into a simple form so that it's gonna be easy for trade also. And they also had the ziggurats. Remember the ziggurats? What is the meaning of a ziggurat? If you can remember.
The big buildings,
A
right?
place for God, something like that.
Bravo, built for gods. Were they polytheistics or monotheistics?
Money,
Monotone.
Monotheistic.
money.
No, yeah.
They,
Mono,
God, they God.
What is the difference between both?
Money,
Mono,
many
monolith.
gods. Money, one
Yeah.
God.
yes, mono means one in Greek. So when I say a monotheistic, means believing in just one God. But
Oh,
polytheistic,
polytheistic.
poly means many. So believing in many gods. Of course, they were polytheistic. So let's check Salman Khan.
In other videos, we talk about how 10 to 15,000 years ago, you have the emergence of agriculture, primarily around river valleys. And it's no surprise that agriculture first came about around river valleys because the rivers would flood, making the soil around them fertile. They would provide fresh water for crops and for the people who would live near them. Later on, the rivers could be useful for transporting things like crops. And so it's not surprising that our first significant civilizations also emerged where the first agriculture emerged. And our first civilizations we'll see in ancient Egypt along the Nile. We will see it in the Indus Valley along the Indus River. We'll see it in China along the Yellow and Yangtze rivers. And we'll also see it in Mesopotamia along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And what we're going to focus on in this video in particular is Mesopotamia. Now, the word Mesopotamia literally comes from mesos, between, and patmos, I'm probably not pronouncing it right, rivers. So the area between rivers is literally what Mesopotamia is referring to. And it's primarily modern-day Iraq. Now, the reason why this is particularly interesting, and it's called the Cradle of Civilization, is not only is it one of, or perhaps the first place that agriculture developed, it was at the crossroads of many other early civilizations. Notice it's right in between the Indus Valley civilization here, and then the ancient Egyptians, and other civilizations that were emerging in the area.
And so because of these factors, that they were in the middle of the world at a crossroads, and also they were one of the first lands that had agriculture in them, and people started to move from the Paleolithic period into the Neolithic one. In it, we call it the Cradle of Civilization. The Cradle of Civilization.
So it's not surprising that
very important.
This was a geography that had significant development in terms of technology, in terms of architecture, in terms of religion, in terms of writing. And the first civilization we believe that emerged in Mesopotamia are the Sumerians. And Sumer and Sumerians, it's most associated with this region right over here of, let me circle it, this region right over here of southern Mesopotamia. And we currently think that this civilization started to emerge around 4000 BCE. You can see it on this timeline here in orange. And they developed things as basic as the wheel. The first wheel that was ever discovered was 3500 BCE in Sumeria. They are famous for their architectural structure. This is a picture here of a ziggurat, which was at the center of many of these Sumerian and, as we'll see, Mesopotamian cities. This would have required an incredible amount of labor to produce. And at the top of these, they had temples to their gods. And their gods, they had a polytheistic religion. And their gods took human form. Also, in amongst the Sumerians is where we think one of the first written languages developed. It wasn't the first. You also have the Egyptian hieroglyphics, and we think written language emerged amongst the Harappans and the Indus Valley civilization and amongst the Chinese. But it was one of the first languages. This right over here is an example.
So according to the writing, they developed the writing. They were among the first. They were not the first one, of course, but they developed it, their cuneiform, simply because of they needed it to trade with other nations. Very important point also. They adapted a new cuneiform and later developed it to help serve their daily life of trade.
Example of a cuneiform tablet. This is a cuneiform tablet written in the script cuneiform, developed by these ancient Sumerians. Now, when you talk about Mesopotamia, you'll talk about Sumerians, but we'll also talk about other civilizations that emerge. In particular, let me write them all down. You have the Sumerians. You'll also hear something called Akkadian. And as we'll see, Akkadian is both a language and an empire that will emerge. In Mesopotamia, over the roughly 3,000 years BCE, the two primary languages are Akkadian, which is considered a Semitic language. It's related to modern Semitic languages like.
Of course, this one came from Sam, son of Noah, because Sam, son of Noah, he was the first one to speak Arabic, actually, and our own Arabic is driven from him. Later on, the Hebrew and all of these languages also are driven from Sam, son of Noah. Peace be upon him, of course.
Arabic and Hebrew, and the reason why they're called Semitic is because they're spoken, or they're purported to be spoken, by the descendants of Shem, who was Noah's son in the Hebrew Bible. So you have the language Akkadian, which is Semitic, and then you have the other language, which is Sumerian. And as we get into the 3rd millennium BCE, the Sumerians start to have a lot of interaction with Akkadian-speaking people. And Akkadian-speaking people are initially associated primarily with northern Mesopotamia. And we believe the first empire, true empire, perhaps the first empire in the world, emerged from Acadia, and it was called the Akkadian Empire. And if we scroll down over here, we can see how the Akkadian Empire spread. We believe that the town of Akkad, which the Akkadian Empire is named for, someplace in this region right over here. And the first significant ruler who really spread that empire was Sargon, often referred to as Sargon the Great. And you can see that that would have been established around the middle of the 23rd, or actually the 24th century BCE. So around 2350, you have Sargon establishing what might be the first dynastic empire in the world, the Akkadian Empire. And he was able to take control of both northern and southern Mesopotamia. So even the Sumerians were under the control of the Akkadians. And as we'll see over time, you have a lot of mixing between the Akkadian language, the Sumerian language. Akkadian gets written in the cuneiform script. And starting at around this period, Sumerian starts to die as a spoken language, and Akkadian really becomes dominant. Now, the Akkadians rule for a little over 100 years, and then you have several other empires. And it can get confusing. The way I've structured this timeline is this top line right over here is southern Mesopotamia, and this bottom line right over here is northern Mesopotamia. So this orange shows you where the Sumerians were reigning. Some people think that they might have been the first empire. This bottom line here, you can see the Akkadian speakers, but they were fragmented until you have Sargon the Great established.
So Salman here means that before Sargon the Great comes, all of these cities, as we have just said, they were just city-states. We have a totally distinctive civilization in the south of Mesopotamia to that of the north of Mesopotamia. But by the time that Sargon came, he started to unite all of Mesopotamia under just one rule, so that he would start his own dynasty.
Pushing the Akkadian Empire. Now you briefly then have a short-term Neo-Sumerian Empire, but the next significant empire that's often talked about when associated with Mesopotamia is the Babylonian Empire. So Babylonian Empire was centered at Babylon, right over here, and it really became a significant empire under the ruler Hammurabi.
So do you remember Hammurabi and Hammurabi's code? How many codes?
Yes,
There are
42. 42 or 200. Yes.
42.
40.
Yes.
42 and
200.
it is overall 280 or
Yes.
290.
200 something. And
280. Yes.
40 something and 40 on the other thing.
Yeah, those of the criminal laws.
41 criminal laws and 241 civilian laws.
So all of them are 282 laws, including only 41 for those of the criminal laws. Very good, nice, great.
And Hammurabi is perhaps most known. You can see how he was able to spread the empire. The dark brown is what he had with his empire when he took rule, and the light brown is what he was able to spread it to. So once again, both north and south. And he's perhaps most famous for his famous Code of Hammurabi, which is depicted here. And it wasn't the first written code, but it was one of the earliest, and you could view it as almost like a proto-constitution. And it was based on things that the Sumerians had before, but they've even influenced things like biblical laws, things that come down to modern codes of law today. Now, after the Babylonians, the other significant empire that would have control over significant portions of Mesopotamia is the Assyrian Empire. And the Assyrian Empire is named for their, I guess you could say, their home base, the town of Assur. You can see it in this map here where we showed the Akkadian Empire. And both the Babylonians and the Assyrians were Akkadian speaking. So at this point now, and as we get into the later Assyrian period, we'll start to have Aramaic be a more significant language, another Semitic language. But as you can see here, the Assyrian Empire at its peak controlled much of the modern day Middle East. Now, the Assyrian Empire would eventually collapse in the 7th century BCE and would be taken over by the Neo-Babylonian Empire. I have a map of that right over here, which also controlled much of the modern Middle East. Probably the most famous ruler of the Neo-Babylonian Empire was Nebuchadnezzar II, from the Hebrew Bible, famous for taking the early Jewish people captive, the famous Babylonian captivity. But eventually they will be overthrown in the 6th century BCE by the Persians and Cyrus the Great, and that will actually be the end of the Babylonian captivity.
Teacher, the period finished.
All right, Yazan. The best thing about you, Yazan, is that you just come after the period's finished and you do not contribute. Yazan, did you give me your project? Yes. You know that the last date was last Thursday, right?
I will do it today, and I will send it tomorrow.